Hello, everyone, and I am Eric Savinsky, and I'm here with,
Todd Crawford.
and we are Too Cool for the Comic Shop. And in this episode, we will be discussing the Indiana Jones quadrilogy, four films in the illustrious action adventure franchise by Lucasfilm and co-creators Steven Spielberg, George Lucas. So, Todd, what is your relationship with these movies?
I have a particular fondness for Indiana Jones because I remember watching it when I was young, like single digits, with my mom late at night to be on like TNT or something, particularly Temple of Doom and Last Crusade as well. Raiders was never really on as much. Like I know I'd seen it, but I remember like watching it for the first time in full, probably freshman year of college. But I always have really fond memories of when those movies were playing. And I love things I could watch at my dad's house and my mom's because having a split household, there wasn't much common connection there between the two. So something like that I can enjoy at both houses with both families are always really special to me.
Yeah, that's really fair. I think Indiana Jones captures something that is very akin to the family, all ages appeal that Star Wars has, but it's more grounded than Star Wars because it is in the real world, in the relatively modern history, the 1930s. Definitely not the 1950s. We never went there. But yeah, the 1930s. And it's funny that you mentioned maybe particularly a fondness over second and third films because rewatching Raiders of the Lost Ark is a classic film and it is amazing and it is really good at capturing the character of the everyman protagonist. I don't know if anyone's really better at that than the Indiana Jones character or Harrison Ford as an actor. But at the same time, I think there's something to be said for similar to A New Hope as well, at least for me personally, because we just rewatched Raiders over the weekend, Colton and I, and I just thought to myself, like, I think I like Temple of Doom and The Last Crusade more than Raiders, and I don't know what it's about. Maybe the self awareness, the side characters. But Raiders of the Lost Ark is like that untouchable original, right? Similar to Star Wars, I actually like the sequels more in a personal way.
I completely agree with you, even though I disagree. It's like my mind and my heart say two different things
Yeah, right. Yeah,
because
I kind of feel that way too.
like the first one, I'll say this, I think it's the only perfect film in the series. Like, I get why it's like at the top of everybody's list, and it deserves to be there. With that said, I could maybe watch that on a Friday night. Temple of Doom and Last Crusade, I could watch Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, like all 7 fucking days. I never get tired of them. I always have fun with them. But it's like Raiders, I think it's the pacing. And I'm not saying the pacing's bad, but it's a little more deliberate than the others.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's the first thought that came into mind when Colton and I were watching it. We like gave our first criticism, not positive or negative necessarily. But yeah, halfway through Raiders of the Lost Ark, Colton just kind of spoke up and he was like, this movie's slower than I thought. And I was like, yeah, you're not wrong.
It really is. And like, once again, that's not like a slander on the movie. It's actually a much more mature film than the sequels. The sequels are definitely much more for kids, whereas I think the first one's much more adult. Like, if we're just jumping right in, like Raiders, there's an early scene in the film where there's some poisoned food on the table or something, and a monkey ends up eating it and dying. This cute little monkey. You probably wouldn't
Yeah.
have that in the sequels.
I don't think so either. It's kind of that intrigue and exposition that and I don't use exposition as a bad term necessarily either. They really build up those interactions amongst a fairly large cast or a movie where a good chunk of these characters you won't see again. I guess a good chunk you will. I mean, Crystal Skull kind of Marion back into the fray as well, which I actually think is one of the highlights of Crystal Skull. But getting off topic, um, there's just a scene that I think is actually pretty interesting, especially if you haven't seen the movie 20, 30 times, where they actually go into the discussion about Relic. They tell you what the Lost Ark is all about. They build up in your imagination what it could mean, what it does, and it's when all of these guys are sitting in the auditorium at the college, they're explaining it. And you don't really get that, at least not in as much of a satisfying way with the stones or the Holy Grail, in my opinion. I feel like the relic in this movie is built up and can never be topped. I mean, it's in the title. Temple of Doom, the temple itself is not the relic. The Holy Grail is not in the title of Last Crusade. And fittingly enough, the relic, the MacGuffin, this film is in the title, and I think it definitely earns that slot.
Yeah, it's one thing, not to change pace here, but without forgetting it, because each of these films have such memorable introduction scenes. The opening to this is, I mean, not only one of the most iconic scenes of all time, but one of the most perfect bits of filmmaking, I think.
I think so too, because I was thinking of it kind of in a different light than I'm used to, because it's been a couple of years, I think, since I rewatched these films. And Raiders of the Lost Ark, the first 10 minutes or so, does an excellent job of explaining character traits of Indiana Jones with basically very, very minimal dialogue. And like 10 different things about Indiana Jones just watching this sequence. He's like well learned, and he sees the poison darts, and that he's wise enough to maneuver the booby traps. He's also fallible enough that when he gets the treasure and tries to replace it with the sack of dirt, it doesn't work. So he's lovable because of his mistakes. And then when he's running away from the natives, like, you definitely get a sense that things don't always go according to plan. Basically have this foundation laid of basically how everything works with his character, how he operates in these adventurous scenarios. It works off of a villain. You get all of that established in like 10 minutes. And I don't know if any other film does that such a efficient way.
I agree, and it's funny because Last Crusade, it's one of my only issues with that movie, is that it tries to do kind of the same thing, but basically young Indiana Jones, River Phoenix becomes the Indiana Jones we know and love in like the course of 10 minutes.
Yeah, no, it's I love that sequence in Last Crusade, but it's also very indulgent, and I think that could be one of the criticisms that most sequels go through, right? That there's a certain thread, there's a certain line where it's like, oh, you want to see these things and have these nods to the other films, but if you do too much of it, it's as your adult brain is kind of hard to separate that from your and like glee for it and your analytical side.
Yeah, like, and it's funny because I never thought about that. What you mentioned about knowing everything about Indy in that first scene that you need to know about him, but that's completely true, and it's so effortless. You don't need, or at least I didn't even recognize it watching it. And I think it's kind of because you take for granted Indiana Jones because he's such a pop culture figure. Everybody knows him, even if you've never seen one of his movies. So it's easy to kind of like let that like graze by you without calling attention to it.
Exactly. So that's when we watched that on Saturday night, I just kind of tried to watch it and kind of put myself in the headspace of I don't know what this character is all about. So when I did that, I was like, oh my god, that's how you truly realize the brilliance of that opening sequence. Because if you don't think of it from a character standpoint, then it's just fun, iconic action adventure. But if you think of it as a defining character sequence, that's why it's so good, in my opinion.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And moving on from Indy, and then like you said, Harrison Ford is just kind of a great everyman, even though he's really not. He's better than pretty much every man. It's like Ryan Gosling, who played
Yeah.
opposite of him in Blade Runner, which we talked about in an earlier episode. Like it's so funny watching movies with them and thinking like, I relate to that. That's like me. If I was 50 times more handsome and strong and confident and cool.
I think the everyman trope is so effective though, because I guess it's kind of poorly named, honestly. It's like it should be named what every man wants to be trope, or what every good man wants to be trope, because Indy's sexy, he's funny, he's smart. Like literally, Colton was naming off all of these things towards the end of the movie when they were in the submarine. It was like, yeah, you're not wrong, hun.
It's funny that you mentioned that too because they also let him, and I think the thing with the Everyman that's pulled off with all these characters, like John McClane, for instance, he bleeds, he gets hurt, he drags his feet across broken glass, and it pains him. You see it, and I think Harrison Ford is very good at being very sensitive, but also very strong. And I think that's like the key to those characters having both those qualities.
Yeah, absolutely. I can think of many moments throughout the trilogy where he is very sensitive and very strong. And honestly, I think that might be a big reason why I have a more of a personal affinity for Temple of Doom and Last Crusade. I almost called them both sequels, but a lot of people forget that Temple of Doom is actually the first movie in the chronology.
Oh yeah, I always forget about that too. That's such
I
a
know
weird
everybody does.
that whole movie is so weird. I truly
It's very weird.
I don't know what they were thinking with any of it. Like I love the movie. I'm not saying anything negative about the movie. Like more than even the biggest defenders, I'm probably more of one. But I truly don't know what they were thinking at any point in the movie or why they made the decisions they did.
No, it's a fun movie. I don't know if it would exist today, honestly, with all of its racial stereotypes and faults and all of that. I think there's a really fun core of the movie, and you know what? They end up fleeing. They end up freeing the child slaves. So you know what? I'll take it. It's whatever.
It's all worth it in the end.
Yeah.
Did draw a connection between Temple and Raiders, other than the obvious. Did you know that there's a scene that people criticize about Marion, and she confronts him about she basically accuses him of taking advantage of her because she was younger, and I think she was a student when they were first originally together. That's they knew each other before the events of
Hmm.
this film. And originally, I guess that they wanted, I think it was Lucas, Lawrence Kasdan, and Spielberg. I feel it was all three of them, but I could be mistaken there. They all wanted her to be much younger, like something really weird and creepy, like 11 or 12, and he was obviously much older. And thank God they didn't do that.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know. I've never heard that before. So is that like a valid rumor that they wanted to do that? That seems odd.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even think it's a rumor. Like where I read it, it was like an actual interview with them, published by like a credible web. Like it was like like it wasn't New York Times, but like they wouldn't publish a thing about George Lucas talking about making Indiana Jones a pedophile just on a whim.
Oh, for sure. That's very interesting.
I'm
See, I
googling it
just
now.
the line with Marion in the bar did stick out to me on the rewatch. So my kind of headcanon assumption was that, she was just a kid, is what she says in the line. So I'm just kind of assuming like, okay, she was like 18, 19. Maybe he was a professor, maybe she was a student, I'm sure there was something weird going on there. So that might have been a little unsavory, but I would like to believe that Indiana Jones did not fool around with an underage woman, girl.
Yeah, like I like that they make him a flawed character and they makes mistakes, but being a
Yeah.
pedophile is a bit too far in that
Yeah, no,
direction.
that's why in my head canon it kind of rides the line. Like maybe she was like 19 and he was like 30 or whatever. I don't know how old Indiana Jones is even supposed to be. I guess I could do the math from the Last Crusade like intro, and that was like 19 freaking 13 or something, and then it was like years. So I guess Indy's like in his 30s. Yeah, I guess so.
I'm looking at the article now, so it's a Polygon. So I guess not like a major publication, but it's not like The Onion or something.
Yeah, no, I see that now. It
Yeah.
is weird.
Although I am kind of curious though, because I'm not seeing it like sourced where they got the dialogue from with all them saying it, which it has for other things.
Hmm.
Oh wait, no, never mind. It does. It's a transcript of a 1978 story meeting that they actually link up.
Oh,
All right.
that's odd.
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny because the older I get, it's like you learn that your father was right about all the things that you kind of resented and rebelled against when you're in like college. And that's kind of how I feel about George Lucas. The older I get, the more that I'm like, oh wait, no, he had a point on this, or oh, I see what he was doing now, and oh, I just
Huh.
didn't understand something. It was actually smarter than me when I thought I was smarter than the material. And that's one of those things like, oh wait, no, George Lucas still has some really bad ideas.
Yeah. No, definitely. I'm glad that, between the three of them, it left it open to the imagination about what that means, taking advantage of, and all that stuff, because then it's not explicitly illegal, whatever the fuck all that means.
I just imagine it was like they said it to Ford on set, and he was just like, no, I'm not saying that, and that's just how it went. Like
That's a very, very real possibility. This is the same man who had diarrhea in the desert, and he was like, "Can I just shoot the guy instead?" And they were like, "I suppose."
I'm glad you picked up on that thread because that's what I was leading towards. That's such a. I remember seeing that the first time I saw that scene. I was walking in the electronics section of Walmart with my mom, and it must have been a year or two before Crystal Skull came out or something. Because they released some films on DVD, special editions, and all that. And I just saw that scene of the guy doing all the sword stuff, and Indy just shoots him. I remember thinking that was so cool as a kid. Even just like it was so funny just to walk through and see that scene and sticking with me. And then I was like, oh, that's one of the most iconic movie scenes ever.
Yeah. I don't think Colton knew the background of that scene, so I was glad to tell someone new this weekend. And I was like, "Yeah, Colton, that's so iconic because I did like shit all day, right?"
I didn't know he was shitting. I knew
Well,
that
yeah,
he
no,
improvised the gunshot, but I didn't know it's because he had diarrhea.
that is absolutely true because the only reason he improvised the gunshot is because he was like exhausted and sick, and tired on that day of filming, and like there was going to be a huge choreography of like punching and dodging the knife and all that shit. And then Harrison was like, "I don't feel good, so I have this gun on me, right?"
You know, it'd be really funny
What's that?
if that was like either A, totally wrong, or B, if there was like some nerd in the comments was like, actually he was constipated, which made him really stick, and that's why he couldn't do the choreography because he was just so
There
stiff
you
from the
go.
constipation.
I'm pretty sure I first learned about it in a documentary or something quite a while ago. My dad told me, but I'm pretty sure that's correct.
I re-
Fans in the comments will source me.
I remember going to Disney World as a kid, and they had an Indiana Jones thing, like how to fake a punch and all that to make it look good on screen and stunt work, that kind of thing. And they had a guy go dressed as Indiana Jones and all that. And as a kid, I didn't think it was the character himself, but I just figured it was the guy that played Indiana Jones doing the demonstration, as though Harrison Ford just didn't age and looked kind of different. But he is the only person that plays Indiana Jones ever.
Exactly. Completely true.
And the character was written actually to make it more relevant for other actors to play. Like they talk about Chris Pratt playing the role at one point for a reboot, and now they're very married to Harrison Ford, which in many ways is a good idea. But originally it
Yeah.
was supposed to be like James Bond, where different actors would play him every, I don't know, generation or something.
Yeah, I just don't think we need that. And I don't know if Indiana Jones, not to discredit the franchise, but I don't think Indiana Jones is as unique of an idea as a series to warrant rebooting it with different actors. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and similarly, I feel like Indiana Jones is too human and too specific to Ford. I think that like I could see that idea in concept, but I think once they made the films and they developed the story and his character, I think he's just too human. Whereas like there's that fan theory that each actor playing 007 is a different agent that's assigned a number. You can't really do
Oh
that
yeah,
with
exactly.
Indy. He's just Harrison Ford.
Yeah, no, I could see that. And I think the coldness of a spy thriller in the James Bond movies. Kind of makes sense with how they evolve with different actors portraying the same character potentially. Yeah, I don't think that works with Indiana Jones. And then I also doubly don't think it works because if they would have done it, then they would have done it with Crystal Skull, right? No, that was a how many year gap? 30 some or around 30-year gap between Last Crusade and Crystal Skull. So if you didn't do it there, and you're not going to do it now with yet another movie, the fifth movie that comes out, slated for 2021 with COVID-19. It's probably going to be pushed back to 2022. But we are getting an Indiana Jones 5 with Harrison Ford as well. So again, like you said, they're married to Ford. I don't think the role would work with any other actor, and I definitely have no desire to see it with a Chris Pratt or anybody else.
Yeah, I agree, and I like Chris Pratt. I think he'd be fine in the role. I just don't think that the role's open to that.
At the same time, it's like, if we think Chris Pratt would be good to be Indiana Jones, I don't know, why not just make a new adventure series of movies that is a different character in a different time period, blah, blah, blah. I don't know. Be a little bit more creative instead of making an Indiana Jones reboot. And that's basically what the Uncharted series is. And you're playing through those games on PlayStation right now. Uncharted is essentially Indiana Jones, but like in the modern day. That's basically what
It,
it is.
it really is, and like it's funny because it is just a little bit different enough where you have like the recurring characters rather than a different cast for each movie. It's the
Mhm.
same supporting cast, little details like that, but like it's pretty much just Indiana Jones.
Yeah, exactly. It's a little bit more grand and ridiculous to be appealing to gamers. And it's got some characters that are only in one installment. Like the villains are usually in one installment, just like Indiana Jones. But there's some characters like Sala and Marion that do appear in multiple films and kind of like that. So I mean, it's really freaking similar, in my opinion.
Yeah. So in this film, is it speaking of special effects and stuff like that and stunt work and or behind the scenes, I should say. You know they accomplished the scene with all the snakes. I always find this really fascinating.
Um, how they did it? I assumed that maybe there were a bunch of wax snakes, toy snakes, and then some garden snakes painted black or something.
Yeah, I don't know if they were. I think they had like because they had the cobra and stuff like that. I don't know how many different kinds of snakes they had, but yeah, they had a bunch of fake snakes mixed in with the real ones, and then they also had mirrors installed, so it looked like there was more than there actually was.
Oh, okay.
And when like Indy like he falls and there's like that snake that like strikes at him and he moves back, for instance, there was a window separating him so that Harrison Ford wouldn't get bitten in the fucking face while they're making the movie.
It's probably a good call.
Yeah, yeah. I hate to break the immersion on that one, but he wasn't actually inches away from a snake bite.
Yeah, I mean it really, I don't know. It feels so real though. And even knowing the special effect that goes behind it, that scene in particular feels so um grounded because I mean it is a 1981 movie. There are certain effects that definitely don't feel visceral. Like when people get shot in the Indiana Jones movies, it's very much like, oh, that's like a kind of a cartoony bullet hole. But no, with the snakes, they did a really good job of making it feel like no, we're just in a pit of snakes, and it's not cool.
Yeah, it's just horrifying. Snakes are my biggest fear, so like for me and Indy in that scene, I completely relate.
Exactly, and that's another good thing that the first 10 minutes of the film does too, is that right at the end of the sequence, they throw in his phobia of snakes, and then like you never need that established ever again. It's just always, a joke or a fear going forward.
Yeah, it's crazy to think of like breaking it apart piece by piece and thinking about how these things had to be come up with and concocted. Like, he needs to have a fear. What should his fear be? Okay, we'll have snakes. Why snakes? Okay, we'll put a scene later in where he's in a room full of snakes and all that stuff like grabbing the hat or running with a bullet. It's just so insane thinking about Raiders. and all these things that we really take for granted watching. And unfortunately, like we won't experience Raiders like people who saw it opening night did when it came out, and we'll always, I think, see it in kind of a lesser way probably than they experience because it's just so it's maybe I'm not using the right word, but impermeable in our culture. It's so easy.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying though. I mean, you'll never have that pure,
Wow
truly
factor.
distilled viewing. I mean, it's kind of like that with the Star Wars movies and how Empire might still be your favorite, but you'll never feel the true like adult impact of like the twist at the end. And there's a lot of classic movies that are like that.
Yeah, there's no
There's something to be
meta.
said,
Or,
about just being able to have been living and born or whatever, when those movies actually came out.
that there's always like a meta narrative. Like for instance, like when you see him be afraid of snakes, or you're like, oh, okay, he's afraid of snakes. I know that. I get it. They're always kind of having that like, oh, I remember this moment as you're watching a deja vu kind of thing.
Mhm.
Or like in Star Wars, like behind the scenes, even like I think the more that you know about a certain art form, the more you can appreciate it sometimes. Not all the time, but like you really appreciate the good things on a different level than someone not as knowledgeable might. Hopefully, without sounding pretentious, but I think there's a level of
Totally.
appreciation that the layman may not always get. So, like, you have that. Like, wow, I can't believe this special effect was done this way. That's so ingenious. But there's still kind of a separation. There's like little metal footnotes in there. There's a degree of separation. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, no, it absolutely has that. And that's why when I try to rewatch these movies, I try to look at it with either a deeper lens into, what went into making this movie the way it is. Just kind of more of an analytical, you know, organic approach where I kind of pretend that I haven't seen these movies a billion times. Like I said, just try to analyze what makes it good.
When we get,
Why is the deliberate pacing a good choice? Why is the character set up a good choice? It really just built on things in this movie. And by the time that you get into the desert, there's not a lot of travel at that point, and the movie just steadily builds. I think the other Indiana Jones movies are kind of more peaks and valleys, but Raiders of the Lost Ark just kind of feels like it steadily builds.
yeah, and I feel like we're gonna move on soon. So before we do, I think we have to mention Marion Crane, of course, as being one of the best love interests in a film. Like, you can even really call her that. But she holds her own so much that she's not just a damsel in distress or anything. She's just as confident as Indian, more so in many ways.
Yeah, for sure. And she's the OG. She's the best. Um, like Willie in Temple of Doom, but mostly because I think she's hilarious. We'll get to that later. But yeah, no one else really holds a candle to her. I mean, there's a reason why she was brought back and no other character was in Crystal Skull, essentially. Um, so yeah, I mean, there's really not much to be said that hasn't been said because just I think one of those poster childs for strong female lead, just like Leia was, like Ripley was. Definitely had a few of those in the late 70s, early 80s. And I really think those few characters really started to build up a strong female archetype that we really use a lot today.
Yeah, exactly. In a way that's done very tastefully. Well, like India, like he could just be strong action man. But there's a lot of dynamics there involved, and watching them play off each other and their banter is very entertaining and fun. About them getting on each other's nerves and kind of yelling at each other. It's not like watching like your parents fight. It's witty
Absolutely.
banter.
And they really do replicate that well in Crystal Skull, which again is one of my more favorite parts of the movie is that when Marion comes in again, definitely feels like they kind of replicate their banter that they had more than 30 years prior pretty well.
Yeah, could you imagine if they just brought in a different girl in her 20s for like geriatric Harrison Ford to romance? And
Jesus
how
Christ.
not only how
No,
bad
with
of a creative decision it'd be, but how disgusting it would be to watch.
what George Lucas and Kasdan and Spielberg were thinking, apparently that would have been on point.
Yeah,
The character.
he always liked him young.
Yeah, right? Oh God, that would have been almost as much of a sin as putting Shia LaBeouf in the film. Wait, they did.
We'll have to get to that later. So for
We
Raiders,
will. Now we should guess, what more is there to be said about Raiders of the Lost Ark? One of my favorite practical effects of all time is still the face melting and all that stuff. When you realize that they filmed that for hours, slowly melting wax dummies and just like seeing what it looks like in the final product. Just those practical effects and like that dedication to the craft, in that way, it's not really seen anymore.
no, that's the kind of blockbuster filmmaking that like I relate to because I grew up watching it, and then you watch like the behind the scenes. Like a lot of VHS tapes used to have that. They'd have like one special feature at the end or two where it'd be like the trailer for the movie, and then like a 10-minute making of video and stuff
Yeah,
like that, or a separate VHS tape for that. And it was always like such a cool thing, especially back then compared to now, to see how they did it. And so like I always think about that with those old blockbusters. Like now you watch them, and there's a lot of good ones. I'm not saying that they're worse now necessarily, but there isn't that level of ingenuity.
yeah, exactly. That's kind of where I'm getting at. Where a lot of problems can be either solved or mucked up further by special effects, but something like Indiana Jones, where there's very few digital effects, they really have to get creative in scenes like the climax of the film, and that just will always stick with me. Just kind of knowing how that process was. But I know there's kind of a popular criticism of Raiders of the Lost Ark where it's like, Indiana Jones does not propel the plot. And I completely disagree with that statement. I was wondering what your thoughts are on it.
You know, it's interesting because I've heard that argument before, and I've always kind of you have like a knee jerk reaction. I disagree with it, of course, but it's one I never put much thought into. I think that like writing 101 and structuralism and all that can sometimes get in the way of it
Hmm.
in a negative way. And it's interesting, like because like, oh, technically it's poorly written because of this. But for me personally, it's kind of like a nitpick almost.
Oh,
But
it absolutely is. Well, it's kind of a hipster take on a 30 plus, 40 plus year old movie, in my opinion, at the same time, because, you could look at it two ways, like the logical progression as if these events were actually happening, right? If you're looking at it that way, saying Indiana Jones, what he does doesn't matter, there's the very simple fact that they're digging in the right spot. They wouldn't have found the Ark, the bad guys wouldn't have found the Ark, and then none of the other events would have happened without Indiana Jones's superior ingenuity and resources. But if you look at it thematically, say the Nazis found the Ark and it didn't matter one way or another how they got it. Thematically, what the story is about, that Indy and Marion don't seek power through archaeology. They don't seek power through these relics. This is exactly what Balak and the Nazis are doing. So they have to be there to close their eyes for the shock of the rest of them getting decimated by God's wrath to even work. Thematically, Indiana Jones has to be in this movie for you to have any moral take back on what's going on. This movie, the entire runtime, is all about conquering your arrogance, I guess. And like Belloc is like even very clearly points it out in the middle of the film where they're sitting at of a cafe kind of, but in Cairo, so I don't know what that's called. Um, where Belloc is like, I'm a shadowy reflection of you, and it just takes a little nudge for you to become me. That never happens throughout the movie, and that's kind of like the underlying tension of the film. And obviously, Indiana Jones is important to that from a story standpoint. So when people say Indiana Jones is not important to Raiders of the Lost Ark, I just completely think that they don't get the point of the movie at all, I guess.
I get what you mean, like thematically looking at it like as a story, because they are the avatars for the characters in many ways. Indy particularly. But I guess I think what they're looking at it is, and this is what kind of like irks me, is that I think they look at it like it's like a history class, and like, well, actually, like it didn't matter what Churchill did in this war because he wound up, you know what I mean? Like they're looking at it like
Yeah,
it's a
okay,
real
yeah,
thing that
yeah.
happened.
The
And
Ark just got sealed away in Area 51, doesn't fucking matter. So they're like only viewing things through the lens of what the absolute finite ending is and not like the journey of the movie.
exactly. And in the, I think I read an article from Crackers where I first heard it, where Indy didn't do anything back in high school, is where I heard it before. And like, it's kind of a fun thing to think about, I guess. But to me, it's kind of a pseudo criticism, and also
Totally.
like, because it's like, well, the protagonist has to stop the villain, kind of deal. But how I feel is, you're watching Indy, you're seeing him build up at the very beginning of the sequence of events with him running from the boulder and all that shit, and it's always him like being this cool guy who then fucks up. He replaces the satchel with the weight, and then it doesn't work. But he still gets a treasure, and then at the end, it's still taken from him because there's more men than him. And that's essentially kind of what happens throughout the rest of the movie as well. Is that
Yeah.
he's cool, he's saying all the stuff you want to say, but he's still kind of a victim of circumstance in a lot of things, and he kind of makes these mistakes by being a little careless. And then ultimately, the Nazis, believe it or not, have a lot more manpower than one man, and they do take him there and hold him hostage, and they do open the box, which they would have done anyways. But he also like, remember the scene where he finds I don't know what to call it, the staff, and shines a light through and all that. Like, you could say, well, somebody was going to find it anyway, so it didn't matter that he did. But that's so, I don't know.
That's so not a criticism to me because guess what? He did find it. Like, this is the story we're given. Who cares about what if scenarios? Because that's not what was written. It's just the most desperate. Oh, I need to complain about this iconic movie somehow. It needs to not be perfect somehow. Is that what that screams to me?
Exactly, and it's like I said, it's kind of a funny thing to say, like, oh, well, when you think about it, like, he didn't do that much. That's kind of funny, and like, if it was like on Family Guy for like 30 seconds and you don't get to think about it, like, oh, that's kind of
Yeah.
interesting, whatever, and then it slips your mind. But people seem to like take it as a real criticism, and I like fun theories and all that, and fan theories and stuff, but like, I hate being that guy, like, shut up, nerds. But that's kind of how I feel about that one.
Pretty much. Um, yeah, it's sometimes it's funny to like point out an observation, but to really hold it against the film and to like judge it so harshly. I guess what I think about a lot of the times with his argument, this whole argument about Indiana Jones not being important to Raiders, like the entire crux of an episode of The Big Bang Theory. I remember watching that episode and just being like irritated that a TV crew instead of writers. It would be hilarious playing about Raiders of the Lost Ark for 24 minutes.
I feel like there should be support groups for people with family members who put Big Bang Theory on when they're in the room.
Probably. Oh my god.
Does
But
insurance cover that?
probably not.
Yeah,
I feel
true.
like that's one of those it's not a pre-existing condition, so
But
it's not going to get covered, unfortunately.
with Raiders and all this, I
Did
feel
want
like,
to point out a couple things that you said
okay,
based on your take on this. Is that I think you hit the nail on the head with perhaps what is the number one biggest point of relatability with Indiana Jones is that you said he's a victim of circumstance. Isn't everybody, isn't everyone in life, we make these plans to achieve our goals and those are the relics, but like you might get so close and then like life has other plans and for some reason that always spoke to me even as a kid because like nobody wants to see the arc get misused and then like taken and then stolen away in Area 51 or whatever. But for some reason, that ending was never unsatisfying as a kid either. Whereas sometimes I feel like movies or TV, as they have these more realistic, big picture endings, and they can kind of come off as unsatisfying because you still want like a bow tied on everything when the whole point is that it's kind of unsatisfying if that is the point, that kind of does serve to be the bow, I guess. So like, I feel like that's part of the reason why Indiana Jones is satisfying to watch is because yeah, things that he may want always get ripped out from under him. Because I'm thinking of all four MacGuffins, he never like walks home with any of them. I think that would be wrong and weird. Like if in Indy 5, whatever the MacGuffin is, he like can actually place it in a museum. Wouldn't that just be so bizarre to see happen?
Yeah, it's funny to think about. I think the appropriate end, because I thought about that. I watched Crystal Skull, and I think the Last Crusade has one of the best send-offs to a character ever, the final shot. I kind of think they could have made more movies if they wanted to, and I kind of respect they didn't because I'm glad that they focused their attention elsewhere creatively. But if you had to end Indy in just a trilogy, having him ride off in the sunset with Sean Connery and that particular shot and how it's done is so immaculate. But then, like the ending in Crystal Skull, I'm probably not like most people. I think it's a fine ending. Whatever, he gets married and all that. But I was saying, like, how are they going to end it next time? Because they know it's going to have to be, like, if not the last, pretty fucking close. I thought, what if Indiana Jones himself just winds up in a museum because he's just a relic?
Yeah, I was gonna say no. I do not. I would not wish the challenge of writing Indiana Jones 5 on anyone. I'll tell you that right now. That is a
No.
hard sell. That's harder to sell to me than Star Wars sequels. The Star Wars universe is just so grand and expansive. So many moving parts where it's like, oh yeah, the terrorist part of the empire like kind of picked up the pieces 30 years later and formed themselves back together, and the same heroes and a few new ones like have to fight. And that makes sense. You can get a trilogy out of that. Like with Indiana Jones, it's so much more fluid. Like, can do whatever. They can make anybody the bad guy, whatever the Russians going to be the bad guys again. Like, who the hell knows? They could do whatever the hell they want. I have no idea, dude. I'm
Yeah,
excited because I think they're going to make an Indy 5. Like, Jesus Christ, I would hope they realize they have to do it right. And, it's not George Lucas and Steven Spielberg in charge, which I kind of don't know if they had a lot of the greatest ideas on Crystal Skull. Um, then again, it could be a shit show. So
it's
I have
really hard to
no
say, and it's
clue.
like, on one hand, I'm not one of those people. I'm not a Lucas hater. I'm not a Spielberg hater. I think they made mistakes and all that. I think typically, like, I'm usually okay with their ideas and concept, but the
Mhm.
translation of it, like, it doesn't communicate with audiences anymore, and I get that, and I don't even disagree with audiences in a lot of these cases. But there is something about it being their baby and all that that's like sad to see someone else come in and direct it, and like that's fine, and hopefully we'll do a good job. But it is strange to think about that.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I guess I'm such a Star Wars fan and a fan for everything Star Wars. I have kind of let go of the, oh, this is their baby syndrome. Like, I let go of that a long time ago. Because when you look at it, something like Star Wars, even before Star Wars was sold to Disney, it had much expanded universe material that people had beloved, by different authors, by different game designers, TV show um, writers, and all that stuff. So it's like when something becomes that big, it's already a collective work, even if the person who was originally in charge still says, "Oh, everything goes through me." It's kind of like it's just not a big deal to me. If the story feels right, it feels right to me, regardless of who ends up writing it, I guess. So I mean, it's really kind of a case by case basis for me. I mean, as much of the next guy, I like seeing one artist's vision and what that turns out to be. Very much like that with novels, for example, and series. But you become a pop culture phenomenon. There's just different things that kind of have to be sacrificed if you want to be relevant for more than a few years.
Yeah, and I guess typically I'm more of the sense like I'm happy to let those things lie in the past. And I see both sides of it. And I get what you're saying too, is with the expanded universe and the multimedia and all that. I definitely think
Hmm.
people could do a good Indiana Jones, but I don't know.
I don't know. I'm very interested in seeing it. I'm obviously going to see it in the theaters whenever it does come out because it's still Harrison Ford. It's still the character and the property. I just have no idea what they're gonna do because we're jumping ahead to Crystal Skull and its ending, but Crystal Skull, if riding off into the sunset wasn't already your kind of stereotypical last hurrah, isn't an old guy getting married to his old flame and then Shia LaBeouf putting the freaking hat on his head? How is that not an ending? And the movie doesn't even star Shia LaBeouf because that movie seems to suggest like, oh, Shia LaBeouf is indie now. We're not going to get that either because everyone knows we don't like Mutt as a character that much.
Yeah, and that's really the thing I think is that they you could tell they wanted that spin-off so bad. Particularly, I
God.
guess Spielberg probably did because he seemed to have a weird thing with Shia for a while, where he wanted to prop him up to be a big star.
Yeah, didn't those days go by? Now Shia LaBeouf's just kind of like the laughing stock of former A-list celebrities.
Yeah, I mean, he has that one movie out now, Honey Boy or something like that, that's supposed to be good. And I feel bad for Shia because, like, I don't know if he's public about this, but like, think about like being a child actor and that alone, and psychologically how that could affect you, and being like even a teenager, like he was probably like what 18, 19 when he made this movie, or Crystal Skull, I should say. Like,
Yeah,
that's got to be psychologically damaging. Like people like him and Justin Bieber and all that. It's like I can't put myself in that position of stress and responsibility.
oh,
And
for
then
sure.
also, I mean, I'm not saying that anything happened to Shy or trying to talk hypothetically there, but with many child stars, I mean, let's be real, there's a lot of abuse behind the scenes that we don't know about for a very long time. And even if it may not happen to you, you see it happen or it's a threat. Like, that's stuff that we don't get to grow up with developmentally. So I always kind of try to give a pass to child stars who have their meltdown because I couldn't
Yeah,
take that. I know I couldn't deal with being Justin Bieber at his age or now even.
that's a good point. I mean, I think Shia LaBeouf as an actor and a person is kind of like retreated into more of an art house kind of expression. Whatever he is, whatever he wants to do creatively. I don't know if he would even want to be in a fifth one. What is it now? 12 years after Crystal Skull is where we're at this point. So like, damn, that movie's gonna end up being a classic just in terms of age soon enough.
It'd be really funny if he did show up and he was like right beside Harrison Ford the whole time.
Gotta have his beard though now.
Yeah, I don't want to get into it, but I just crossed my mind, so I gotta bring it up, and then I'll go back to like the movie we're supposed to be discussing. But in
I
Crystal
don't know
Skull,
what
the
movie
one
is
line
supposed to
that
be
pissed
this.
me off more than anything, it, there's a
We've just
scene.
kind of jumped around. We've talked about Raiders in depth, but then we've just kind of jumped around the whole franchise for the rest of
It's
this.
hard not to for something like this, I feel like.
What is? I think if we talk about Star Wars in the future and certain other things, like it is hard to not do that. And besides, we're kind of using these podcasts as like is to discuss like this trilogy. This is this franchise of movies, and trying to draw parallels and stuff here and there. One of the parallels that I just thought of, by the way, that 20 minutes ago you made the comment of you want to see your protagonist truly blow up the villain with the rocket launcher, which Indy did have opportunity to do so. Raiders of the Lost Ark. But what's kind of fascinating about Indiana Jones, like a lot of people think like, yeah, Indiana Jones, like that's the cookie cutter adventure movie, generic, blah blah blah. Not really, especially when you think of certain elements. Like, you realized that Indiana Jones does not defeat the villain in three of the four movies.
Another thing to consider too is that the theme, especially the first film, but the series as a whole, is that Indiana Jones, he has that kind of wanderlust. He wants to go and find things, and he always says that it belongs in a museum, is his philosophy. That's his motivation to get it in front of a museum. But with something like the Raider of the Lost Ark, the film itself, um, the Lost Ark, and they're going to find it. The ultimate moral is that he has his kind of almost selfish reasons, you could say, and he has this really voyeurism for going and finding these things. I think it's the accomplishment of getting to have it, to claim this exotic thing. But the Nazis have their selfish reasons. They want to use it for destruction. He wants to use it for knowledge. But power and knowledge are kind of, knowledge is power in that cliche. They're kind of the same
Mm,
thing in that the ultimate morality and the spirit or the spiritual and emotional journey Indy has to go through in this film is recognizing that the Ark of the Covenant is too powerful for mortal man. That was the Nazis' hubris that led to their downfall, and that he recognized the last minute. So when they look away and the Nazis are killed, him as an archaeologist has undergone growth to accept that some things don't belong in mortal hands.
absolutely. And he kind of goes through that um kind of in Temple of Doom, but he really goes through that in the Last Crusade. And in general, the Last Crusade kind of hits a lot of the same themes and expands some of the same themes from Raiders of the Lost Ark. Last Crusade really is a sequel, Raiders of the Lost Ark, both in chronology, but also just authentically. If you cut Temple of Doom out of the middle of the 80s there. Because the Last Crusade, just the journey that he goes through, they start off early on in the movie when they switch from young Indy to present day, 1938 Indy. And he's fighting over that cross artifact that belongs in a museum. So, and he like says it in the fight scene on the boat. So already that movie shoves back into your face. I think with River Phoenix as well, multiple times, that has always been his ideology. So that's more in center stage in Last Crusade. That's why, partially, why it's so compelling that he does let go of the Holy Grail at the very end of the movie, because you know that he absolutely wants to attain that. Just kind of goes back to what you were saying, that his father helps him realize that the spiritual growth of even finding it is what really mattered in the first place anyway.
Yeah, exactly. The thing with Temple of Doom is that it's such an outlier in the series in so many ways, and I don't know, maybe it's because I watched as a kid, but it's my favorite to watch probably. Even though like I think the other two films of the trilogy are like better in pretty much every
Mhm.
way. I think that even Last Crusade is probably just as entertaining. But there's something about Temple Doom, the craziness of it. And I'm not saying this, I'm not calling it so bad it's a good movie. I genuinely enjoy the film without irony. But I think
Mhm.
that I feel like I saw it as a kid, and I can always feel like being a kid watching it when I see it, which I could say with so few films that my opinions change so little over time. Even now, when I have that kind of like cricket on my shoulder, the same like, isn't it kind of weird that this is a kid's movie and someone's heart just got ripped out of his chest, and that they're eating these disgusting creatures at this banquet table? It's like the tone is so childish and juvenile in some points, but yet in others, it's so grotesque and violent and just downright filthy, really.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a few scenes with like thousands of bugs, and Willie has to put her hand through the lever to make sure that Indy doesn't die. There's so many scenes that are just kind of balanced with the childlike essence of it, and Short Round is a character that really harkens that emotion. He's with the gang the whole movie, and just kind of the fact that Indiana Jones has a 12-year-old as a sidekick just raises so many questions as well, which never really get answered, by the way. So
Yeah,
that's
I
just
don't. I
kind
think
of
some things are
amusing to
better
me
left
always.
unanswered.
It might be concerning. I don't know.
There's definitely like
Better
you
Lucas
probably
on the
shouldn't be
phone.
putting a child in that situation, I would say.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's kind of funny because I remember playing a video game called Indiana Jones and the Emperor's Tomb on Xbox. It was like one of the only games I actually played through on Xbox, the original. It was actually a prequel to Temple of Doom, and it really not canon, but it acts like it leads into Temple of Doom, and you're doing all this other crazy shit in multiple countries, and it ends in Asia, and you like fight a samurai who's like trying to harness the power of a jade dragon or some crap, and then that kind of leads into another side character in that video game where it's like Indy meets him, and I think like Short Round is like associate or a family member of that man, and then Temple of Doom and the chronology is like shortly thereafter.
Yeah, I feel like Temple of Doom definitely has enough of like probably out of all the books, other than maybe Last Crusade, just because of the father element, you could like make the most OC around because there's so many questions. Like the beginning of the film, for instance, with the shootout at the nightclub, so much of it is just so like foreign and kind of unexplained. Which is what I love about it, though, is that you don't expect that at the beginning of an Indiana Jones movie at all,
Yes,
and the whole thing is just so much itself within the series. It's not, like Star Wars, for instance, the Empire is completely the bridge between A New Hope and Return of the Jedi. You really can't take that out of the equation and make the other two films work cohesively.
absolutely.
However, even being like a prequel, like you've mentioned, Temple of Doom really is like the first one was a success, so they just had a massive Coke party.
Yeah, no, that's pretty accurate.
And I get why people don't like it. I get why it's considered a disappointing sequel. I get why it's irritating. Even though like the clashing tones, like I mentioned with like the horror stuff and the kids stuff, I kind of feel like if you're a kid, that stuff doesn't bother you. Kids like gross things, and that's kind of how I feel. That's my summary of the movie. Kids like gross things, and I was a kid and I watched it, and I enjoy it just as much now, if not more than I did as a kid. I just think it's an absolute blast.
I think so too, because you kind of have a fascination for what ripping someone's heart out is like, and it was certainly disturbing as a kid. When you think about it, there's way worse movies that you could watch. Like there are also classics like Rambo or Alien or Predator, all these other things. So for it being that early PG-13 movie, may have been the first, if I remember correctly. It kind of bridges that gap, and parents will be like, okay, you're old enough to watch this movie, but not these R-rated ones yet. So think about how many people growing up were like Ram ripping that guy's heart out. That was their real first visceral taste of gore, and
Yeah.
it's way less scary than some other things can certainly be. But I think it's just kind of a gateway into like, oh man, this.
That's what I was gonna
Now
say.
I
It's a
get it.
gateway drug for like extreme movie. It's pot.
Yes,
It's the
pretty
marijuana.
much. Exactly. So if this is your cinematic gateway drug, hopefully you're still a few years older once you get into harder, scarier movies, right? But at the same time, it kind of takes this family friendly franchise and pushes it in a slightly different direction. There's also some psychologically disturbing stuff in this movie. They do mind control Indy for like solid 10, 15 minutes, and Short Round has to like burn him to like them back from the brink. And it's just like there's a lot of darkness in this movie. Like alluded to earlier, the child slavery and the impoverished community, but then like minutes away is this wealthy palace. They're harboring all of these evil practices that they do. And eventually, it's just very cathartic, I think, to see the heroes win, because it's certainly the most altruistic, I feel like, that Indy is in all four movies. Because, like, the other three movies, he's with the main cast of characters and the bad guys, but that's about it. At the end of the Temple of Doom, like, he liberated an entire village of children. And it's just, you get that emotional catharsis of him being better than the bad guys in that way, which I don't think you get that same kind of emotional catharsis in the other ones.
Yeah, exactly. And also with the ending, I mean, you get the great what was it, the mine cart? Is that what you call it? I can't.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The Donkey Kong Country minecart ride, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then you get the bridge falling, and they have to climb up the bridge, which everybody copied after. Then maybe it came before Indiana Jones, but that's the first thing I remember where that happened. And the guy gets eaten by the alligator.
Absolutely. There's some iconic shit there. And I know the end of the movie is super exciting. Really, the end of every Indiana Jones movie is, especially The Last Crusade. But yeah, no, I mean, I know it's different, but I never, even as a kid and now as an adult especially, like never mind when things are different, and especially with an action adventure series where the character is so well rounded and malleable. I think that's a credit to this movie is that this movie can show that Indiana Jones can thrive in a completely different setting with completely different side characters. It's still entertaining as hell to watch.
Yeah, yeah, that's the thing. The movie for me is it's just the definition of like popcorn entertainment, and I've never had this, but I always think about it. Like, imagine being like, I don't know, we'll say like 8 or 9, and you have your friends over, and you rent the VHS of Temple of Doom. This is back in the day, of course, and I usually use Netflix now, but I don't think it'd be the same feeling. And
Mhm.
you watch that movie, and you see like they have to eat the gross bugs, or you see the heart ripped out, or you see evil Indy like that. That had just a pure thrill ride every minute of the movie. You know?
Absolutely. It's definitely a group setting movie. A lot of people can have fun watching together, and to an extent, I think all the Indiana Jones movies are. But yeah, no, Temple of Doom's just got a very strong identity. When there ends up being 4 films, I feel like that can only be a good thing too.
Yeah, exactly. And I just love that it just stands out so much.
Exactly. I
So
guess we
go
can move on to my favorite film in the franchise, which is The Last Crusade.
Yeah, I'd say it's probably my personal favorite as well. I watched as a kid like Temple of Doom. Um, but the Sean Connery Harrison Ford dynamic is just so entertaining and fun the whole time.
It's absolutely the heart and soul of the movie, and that's what keeps it consistently entertaining. For me, know, other 2 movies, we can play the comparison game, right? Marion kind of just disappears for like 20 to 30 minutes in Raiders of the Lost Ark. Indy's just kind of alone. And to be honest, Sal is not a very interesting character, in my opinion. So you don't really have that dynamic all the way through. Then Willie and Short Round, you do. But those 2 characters kind of teeter on the brink of, funny and entertaining or just plain annoying. Whereas, Sean Connery's character always entertaining and always plays off Indy pretty much the entire way through the film, at least from when he's introduced to the end of it.
Yeah, and there's just so much more comedy, and it's kind of comedy more in the style of the first and how it did it, where it's just like the dialogue's just really snappy and fast, and the character dynamics. Um, but the film's just a straight blockbuster. It's just like the most Spielberg kind of thing you can imagine, executed in a very straightforward manner rather than Temple of Doom, which is lunacy. And just every minute of it is entertaining and fast paced. Really, my only real issue with the movie is kind of the opening sequence, which is even in its own is fun. It's just one of those things where it's just awfully convenient and kind of, I don't want to say lazy, but it's kind of a lesser version of what the first film has, in my opinion.
Yeah, pretty much. And I think for any scene that is a lesser version interpretation of what something Raiders did, I feel like there's some scenes, especially the ending, which is a better interpretation of what Raiders was going for, where you still have the hubris of the Nazis coming into play, but you also have Indy's morals and his character more center stage than it is in Raiders. So it feels like a stronger ending. It feels like a stronger tribute to the character, and all of that stuff just so good, especially if you're a fan of all the movies and not just single film. So if and then I don't know, just a lot of memorable sequences, and there always are in all of the films. But there's a lot of places that they go. There's a lot of distinct imagery changing. They go to Italy, I believe, so they have the boat chase and kind of exploring the catacombs there. Then you have like the castle where they find his dad, then like the plane chase, and then they have a tank chase through the desert, and then the catacombs and temple that they end up in. Like there's just a lot of visual difference with every main action set piece.
Yeah, and the ending itself, going back to that, is very economical. Where you have the love interest of the film, who just almost unceremoniously just gets killed off, which you haven't seen before in a film like this. So it really ups the tension, like from that point on. It feels like even though you know Indiana Jones is going to be fine, they're not going to kill him, and that's the end of the movie. But even though you know that he's going to be all right, it does kind of do that thing where it's much more tense than the other movies, I think.
Well, absolutely. I feel like the first time I watched the movie and his dad gets shot, like that's a heart pounding moment, and you don't know that the Holy Grail will be retrieved and that he's going to be saved. Let's think about it. Did with the previous two relics, did they ever actually obtain them and then use them for whatever their purpose was? Not really. So I feel like there's that tension of no, you don't really know at least what's going to happen to his dad at that point, especially as a kid when you're watching. So there truly is a lot of tension there, and that drives the absolute thrill of seeing him conquer the obstacles that are in the path of getting the Grail.
Exactly. And in these kind of movies, structurally, it's so interesting because I think you could tell it's a good storytelling when you already kind of consciously know what's probably going to happen, but yet you're still equally invested. Because I think that that's when you get into like the almost without getting too abstract or pretentious, the music of film. You know what I mean? Like you kind of
Absolutely,
know
I
like
totally understand.
the chorus is coming, you know that, but you're swept up in the song of it. And that's really how I feel about this movie. It's just a blockbuster doing that where you know that what's going to happen on some level, but yet you're still just as invested and just as worried for the characters. And that's really when you could tell that I think you're watching a good movie, or at least one that is good for you as an audience member. But uh,
Absolutely.
they equally easily could have killed off Sean Connery's character at that point because a lot of those movies would have too. I mean, structure that wouldn't have been too big of a diversion from what we're typically used to in that father son getting to know each other kind of adventure.
Absolutely. That's a good point. So I think that's one of the few moments where you really don't know what's going to happen in the series, especially because, between the 30s and the 50s, he did die. He did pass away through old age. So, I mean, it's not like it's something that they couldn't have done or that they were saving for a sequel 30 years down the road.
Yeah, that always kind of pissed me off, to be honest, in Crystal Skull, just because, like, it's just so unnecessary, in my opinion. It's, like, kind of fan servicey, but just, like, a weird, sad thing they put in there that doesn't contribute to the narrative at all. Where it's just, like, he sees a picture of his
Yeah,
dad, and he looks and says, "My dad, he's dead," or something like that. And that's all
it's
you
kind of
get.
freaking weird because don't they say that both his dad and Marcus are gone? They say that?
You know, it's funny, I just watched the movie today, and I don't remember.
I think they do. I think they do. But I guess they just feel like fans would have had questions of like, are they still alive? So I guess they just wanted to answer it fairly early in the movie, like, no, they're not. Then
That's
just move
true.
on.
Yeah, because it feels so, like, out of the way is my issue with it. Like, they feel like they have to account for these characters, so they're just like, Indy looks at a picture and says, "Boy, I wish my dad wasn't dead," and and then the audience gets it. Like, it feels so like exposition-y.
Yeah, it's pretty lazy, honestly. Well, it's kind of weird that they feel compelled to do that because this is a franchise that famously does not account for the characters from sequel to sequel. Like, you don't go into The Last Crusade and Indy's like, I wonder what Marion's up to, or I wonder what Willie and Short Round are up to. That never happens in the original three movies. If Salah shows up in the third movie from the first movie, just shows up basically. Um, so like the other movies don't have the interest in accounting for the characters, but I guess so. Skull, 2 decades passed between Last Crusade and Crystal Skull, so they just felt like there's more pop culture built up around it. So I guess they just felt like they had to throw more bones to the audience, I guess.
Yeah, and that gets into an interesting argument I wanted to bring up. That the first time I heard about it was Mike Stiklowski from Red Letter Media and his Plinkett review of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, where he said, "We don't actually like Indiana Jones as a character. We like him as a figure, like an icon. We don't want to see him get old. We don't want to see him get married. We want to be him." And part of me agrees in the sense like the original trilogy. A lot of the appeal there is mystery to them. Like you see him with Mary, and then you see him in the next film with Spielberg's old wife, and then you
Yeah.
see him with another girl in the third movie, and it's like this is a man where you don't know everything about him. You don't know all his experiences, and that's kind of part of the intrigue. But on the other hand, I disagree because I think you do care about Indy as a character, and you do identify with Harrison Ford in the role, even if he is aging, and allowing that character to grow, which really they only start committing to for the most part in Crystal Skull. But I'd say even Last Crusade they do with his dad and everything. I don't
Yeah,
know. I
I
was
think
just
they
curious
do.
about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, my thought on that is that yes, he is like that icon, kind of what you alluded earlier. He's also not James Bond. He's also not like completely closed doors. He's not like this actual man of secrecy. Because you kind of got to think in the terms of the world that he lives in. Yes, he's Indiana Jones sometimes. He's also like Dr. Jones, a professor of archaeology. So it's like he is a very public figure for probably a good chunk of his life. I mean, because he has like a teaching job that he holds for many years. Because I think he's still a teacher, Crystal Skull, right? So it's
Yeah,
like he's doing that for so much of his life. So I mean, at the same time, I think certain aspects of his character are inherently more human and more relatable. So I don't really care that Crystal Skull, in his old age as a character, seeks to answer some questions about, oh, does he end up settling down, getting married, blah blah blah. Because you know what, that can kind of get thrown out the window too if they do make a good Indiana Jones 5. Look at The Force Awakens. I think Han and Leia have like happy life and wedding and all that stuff, but then they're separated by just how different they are in their ways of life, and I could easily see that happening with the character of Indiana Jones as well. So it's like, yeah, it's kind of weird, but is more human, so I kind of forgive it.
yeah, exactly. And I don't know. I kind of get the mentality of people who feel that way about the character, but I also don't agree. Like I think that they're half right, but they're also
Yeah,
half wrong.
I think there's just a fine line that you tread, writing wise with these legacy characters and their fan bases, because everybody's going to want something different from every character. I experienced this with The Last Jedi, which I'm sure we'll talk about eventually on this show. But they did certain things with Luke as a character that were surprising to a lot of people, which made some people react with excitement that, oh, that's actually more human, that's more relatable, that makes sense. Whereas some people were like, no, Luke Skywalker's an icon. He's, this picture perfect vision of what he was in the other three movies. So this is a betrayal of that. And now I hate this movie and I hate this character, right? So I feel like Crystal Skull has some of that problem where you have these feelings attached so strongly to the original material. Then you end up making sequels of said movies decades later. You're just always going to have to deal with some of that divisiveness and the fan reaction with these iconic characters.
Exactly, and it's funny because I think that Crystal Skull really is the most forgettable movie in the series, but it's the one I want to talk about the most because I feel like there's so much more to talk about. Almost like it's kind of like the um, Temple of Doom thing, almost where it's like endlessly interesting, even though the film itself isn't nearly as interesting as I think the discussion around the film is.
Yeah, I completely agree. If you're talking about Crystal Skull, it's more of the meta of why it exists and the outside of the story. But if you're talking about the movie itself, I feel like there is the least amount to say. It's kind of a cookie cutter by the numbers Indiana Jones story, which, to please the audiences, I guess is probably what a lot of people wanted. It's not necessarily a bad film. We'll say that. I think it has a lot of flaws. I do dislike Crystal Skull more than I dislike the Star Wars prequels. Any of them, any of the three prequels, because I feel like there's just more stuff that irritates me in Crystal Skull. Whereas the prequels, say what you will, in Star Wars, they have like a lot of new ideas to offer. Like they're crazy and exciting and totally different from the original Star Wars movie. Crystal Skull was basically just kind of a remake of the Indiana Jones formula, but worse.
Well, I feel like Star Wars, and I'll keep it brief to avoid going on a totally separate tangent, but there's just so much ambition in every scene in this Star Wars prequels, even though
Yeah,
a lot of it can be misguided. I'm definitely not one of those people that's gonna say, "Oh, it's perfect," even though I do find myself often defending them nowadays. But there's
yeah.
just so much, like I don't know how to put it, just so much ambition, so much creativity, so much vision that even when you disagree with it, it's kind of like hard to, in my opinion, hard to just like look down on it or hate it. A lot of people do, but on one hand, like Raiders of the Lost Ark, it's like hard to talk about compared to Crystal Skull because it's above me. The movie's smarter than I am. The movie's better than my opinion of it. It's just there. It's like the monolith in 2001, and I'm the ape, one of the apes surrounding it.
Yeah,
Um,
right.
and similarly speaking, I think like the Star Wars prequels, or you could tell it's crafted by the same hand that made some of those like groundbreaking visionary films. And even though um, there's some points where it kind of like goes outside the lines or makes decisions that you don't agree with or enjoy,
Yeah.
there's still this mastery there. I think you could still tell that you're dealing with an auteur.
Oh, I
Um,
absolutely agree with that. Whereas I don't know if Lucas and Spielberg were kind of in that same mindset with Crystal Skull. I didn't feel the ambition watching that movie. Oh, as a kid, I was like 12 years old when Crystal Skull came out. I mean, it was dope as hell to get a new Indiana Jones movie.
seeing it in
You
theaters,
expected to get the Star Wars prequels, but you didn't really expect to get a new Indiana Jones movie. So when it like happened, it was kind of like,
it was like a
that's
holodeck.
interesting.
Yeah, seeing it in theaters and like being a fan growing up and all that, and then seeing it in theaters for the first time, like I just thought it was like the best thing ever. I absolutely adored the movie, and everybody. And I'm gonna say this, everybody in the theater enjoyed it too. Like you could say like, oh, the masses are dumb or whatever. That's fine. But like it's a crowd pleasing movie that for the audiences of that time, a lot of people really enjoyed. It seemed like.
Oh, absolutely. And you know what? That's a good point that we should remind ourselves is that not everybody is making a 2-hour podcast about talking about these movies. These are kind of simple movies, very crowd pleasing, very entertaining. And, for as much, minority hate that I think that some of these like sequels get, later on, I feel like the masses do typically tend to enjoy them over not.
Well, it's very similar to like James Bond, or even more so, I think Batman, because with Batman you have the Bruce Wayne aspect as well, where like I really didn't care for BVS when I first watched it, but I remember thinking like, well, the Batman stuff was still fun because it's still Batman, and like that structure, not to like it was Batman, I like it, but that structure, those characters, archetypes, just work. And similar, I think Indiana Jones just works. The plot and like even though Crystal Skull's by the numbers, and honestly, it's mediocre. I'm just gonna say it. And I like the
Yeah.
movie. I'm not saying it's bad. I give it, well, I'll rate it at the end of this episode, but like it's pretty
Hmm.
mediocre. But the structure's still there. Harrison Ford's still there, and it just kind of it's tried and true.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. It's not bad like you said, but I would probably rate it in the middle of the road. Whereas, the other three movies, at least for me, would get like nines or tens. They're at the top of their genre of action, adventure, family uh packs is basically what they are. Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull just doesn't get all the right nails on the head, I guess. Kind of a way to say it. But so what were some of the favorite things, I guess, for you from the movie itself?
So some of my favorite things, particularly, actually, I thought Harrison Ford was actually pretty good in it. I was kind of shocked, like, and I like once again him and Marion's banter, especially. I think like the grumpy old man thing at the beginning wasn't the most exhilarating, but then once you get that character and they're all playing off each other, I think that's fun. I think that there's certain set pieces that do work and some that don't. I like when they're exploring in the temple. I like right before the monkey scene with Mutt, where he's like between the two jeeps. I thought was very Indiana Jones, and I like that. I like it's so funny because like I'm defending the movie, like, what do you like about it? I'm like, oh fuck.
I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah,
Uh,
I actually am cool with the alien thing. I'm gonna say that now. To me, it is relevant for Indiana Jones. It's not that big of a stretch. I get
yeah,
why it's a little weird, but considering it's going into the 50s as opposed to like the 30s, it makes sense. I think. I
it
don't
makes
know.
sense too.
That final shot, not maybe not the final shot of the movie, but where like they leave and you see like the pyramid or whatever get destroyed and a UFO rises out of it. I actually love that shot. I think that's really awesome. The CGI holds up incredibly well today, I think.
I think it does too, and I'm actually fine with the aliens as well. Like just the general MacGuffin, I think it's cool. I think it's fine. Like I don't think that needed changed
I
because
don't.
when you look at it, the original films, whether it's Christianity or I don't know if it's a made up religion or actually Hinduism in Temple of Doom, I can't remember. But whatever, those are religious artifacts, religious relics, fictional or otherwise. They all basically have supernatural powers. You essentially have ghosts of whatever rising up out of the ark in the first film. Then, like, the stones in the second film catch on fire, with chanting. And, like, there's always been that, totally not realistic stuff, but, like, it rides the line of adventure and believability and what these things mean. So jumping from religion to a more primitive religion that has actually ended up being based on aliens, I think is actually pretty intriguing.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely get why there's a difference between mysticism and something that might be more like sci-fi fantasy. I do get where it's a little bit out there. Like you said, like at least the religious stuff kind of is religious, but I don't think
Mm.
that it needed to be. I don't think that you get what was the Holy Grail or the or the Ark or whatever they're doing in Temple of Doom. Like I don't think it works because it's religious. I think it works because it worked. And I'll say the aliens in execution don't always work. This crystal skull itself, particularly when it like all the aliens like enter the same body, like it's like a Tool music video or something, and then they kill Kate Blanchett. I
Oh
don't
yeah,
like that, but
oh, that's definitely pretty corny.
yeah, especially because like I love how the skull itself for some reason like we have this H.R. Giger like xenomorph looking skull, or maybe it's I thought that, or maybe they're supposed to be like I think this is canonical. I think canonically they are relatives of ET or something like that, like distant relative species or some shit. But I
Then
don't
that
know.
means that Indiana Jones is actually a descendant of Han Solo because then the ET aliens are senators in the Star Wars prequels. They're in a scene very briefly, so it's all connected, dude.
They are. And then ET in the film ET, he dresses up as Yoda, so that means that not only is Star Wars real in the universe, but the Star Wars movies exist as well. So it's like the best of
Exactly.
both worlds.
It's because we yeah, it's because we idolize Star Wars so much because it was a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, and the Morse code, stars and light speed it traveled. It took a long time to travel, but it got here, and so we decoded it and made it into movies. Little did we know that some of the descendants of Han Solo made it to Earth and made Indiana Jones.
Exactly, and I think that's definitely what they had in mind when they made these films. But
Absolutely.
no, I
Oh
mean,
man.
I think a lot of the film for me works because like I just see it as, and this is the thing, I don't see Indiana Jones as these art house films. The first one kind of is. It is like that Star Wars thing where it's like a blend of, art house and innovation and technical
Yeah.
prowess and just blockbuster entertainment. The sequels to me, it's almost like Rocky, the Rocky series. Even though Rocky has a major comeback later on and they get like critically acclaimed again, but they were just dumb fun
Yeah.
for a few movies. And that's kind of how I feel about Indiana Jones. Like, and I'm not putting it down at all. I mean, I love that they're that way, but it's just kind of a less fun version of the other ones. Like the fire
Yeah.
ants suck, the monkey swinging sucks. Um, Kate Blanchett's villain's kind of it's not bad. It's just I don't think it's bad. At least I just think it's weird.
So cartoony. My brother and I make
Yeah,
fun of her character and her accent like all the time, especially when we watch the movie. It's like impossible not to.
I just think it's bad. I just like think it's bad, or I feel bad because like I know Kate Blanchett can do better, so I feel guilty because I feel like she shouldn't be made fun of. I feel like it's Spielberg's fault or Lucas's fault or not just not hers.
I just feel like I'm laughing with her. I don't know if you could like strut around the way she does in that movie without kind of being in on the joke yourself.
That's true. Um,
I
the
think she
fridge
enjoyed it,
scene.
honestly.
I do want to give some or some feedback, some history. So I saw the film in theaters. I think I saw a little bit of it after, and then I saw it the next time I saw the film, and it was like maybe half the movie. I watched it. I was really, really drunk at a bar. I was with friends, and it was just on the TV with subtitles. And I was just like watching, like glued to the screen, and I just kept thinking, like, what the fuck is this? How did I ever watch this? I can't imagine ever enjoying a second of this. This is the most irritating thing with like little CGI gopher at the beginning, and then you get the nuke the fridge scene and all that.
Yeah,
Um,
well, it's got to throw the '50s music in your face immediately. Like
uh,
there, and
yeah.
then I think something that really rubs me the wrong way now that I'm an adult. As a kid, I thought it was cool, probably, but the fact that they are just barreling through with guns blazing, like the facility that they locked the Ark away in the first movie, like that's supposed to be a cute nod, let the imagination run wild. Like, oh my god, if the Ark is just one box in a freaking warehouse full of artifacts that could ruin the world, like, oh my god, never touch that place. And it just kind of it's a really awesome ending when they pull out and you see the scope of that.
Then you get
Raiders of
that
the Lost
fucking
Ark.
shot. You know which one I'm talking about?
Yeah, the shot at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark
No, no,
where you
no.
see
Like in
all the
Kingdom of the
boxes.
Crystal Skull. I mean, that's a great shot. I'm referring to the bad one. I'm sorry. I should have been more clear.
But my point is that they kind of ruin the mystique of that place. And, like, isn't it confirmed to be Area 51? And then they just like barrel through it, guns blazing, and they destroy all the boxes and all that shit. Like, I just feel like that's unnecessary.
That's what I hate. There's a shot in this film where they're shooting, and then you see like a box is kind of torn at the corner, and it's the Ark inside. It's like, what the hell? It's just sitting there, and they just shoot it, and it's like, I know it's just in a box that they just file away in the original film, but still, like, yeah, that bugs me too.
It's such an egregious Easter egg. Like, it has no reason to exist. And a couple of the early Disney Star Wars movies did this too, where like The Force Awakens, Finn just picks up the ball that Luke trained with his lightsaber in A New Hope. But there's no reason to do it, and then he just throws it away. Like, I don't like Easter eggs that are that pandery. I like Easter eggs sometimes. So when Easter eggs are actually kind of woven into dialogue or like a clever reference, maybe even sometimes a story itself, I'm fine with it because it at least has some goddamn thought behind it. Yeah, shooting the box with the arc in it and then like, look, it's the arc. You like Indiana Jones, right? I know you do. That's why you gave us money to see it again. Like, it's just obnoxious.
Yeah, I no, I totally agree, and I think the film has a lot of that. And as an adult, as a fan, that's the irks me more. Watching it this morning, because I had my childhood opinion, I had the drunk opinion, and I want to get like just a more like ground level, like how do I feel about this? And I wasn't paying total attention. I was doing other stuff. Um, while I was watching the movie because I've been busy, but it was really to me. It just felt I don't really want it to exist still. I still want it to end on Last Crusade with that perfect shot for that character. But I think it's kind of harmless. Like once again, like I think if you're a kid at that age, it was fun to watch. And it is just a random blockbuster from that era of film. I don't think it's
Mhm.
one of the worst ones. I don't think it's
Yeah,
Transformers or something like some people like to pretend, or I shouldn't say pretend. They like to claim because I don't want to put it as though I'm better than them or my opinion is true and
I know
theirs
what you mean, though.
false.
And I think it's hard to say like, do I wish it wouldn't have been made or wouldn't have existed? Because it's kind of hard to separate for me because like I have a lot of amazing memories revisiting the Indiana Jones franchise with my family and friends in 2008. Yes, I did, and child me really enjoyed that. And I feel like my dad, who loves Indiana Jones, Star Wars that he grew up with, he might think Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is shit. But did he enjoy it because he got to spend time with his family and going out to seeing it? I think he did. So, I mean, for me, for these kinds of movies, especially where they really are like family movies, it's so hard to separate the movie from the experience that you have with it. So I'm glad it exists. But at the same time, my highly logical brain can say, well, perhaps it doesn't make super loads of sense, and the trilogy probably should have remained a trilogy. I can objectively agree with that, but hey, we got what we got. So, and like you said, it's harmless. Like it's more Indiana Jones content. If you don't like it, then whatever, don't watch it.
Yeah, it's kind of like, I don't know. I was shocked by how not irritated I was through most of the movie. Like there were little moments, but it's a 2 hour movie. It's like a concise 2 hours, and I don't know. A lot of the stuff is irritating. Like I'd say like that was truly irritating. Maybe like 10 minutes of it. You know what I mean? It's not like you're getting
I
like poked and jabbed every single second of the film.
No, it's definitely not as bad as people say it is. Like, I think people take those 10 minutes of pure irritation and they overblow it, make it feel like it's like 90 minutes of the movie is that bad. I think those are kinds of the things that you've been referencing. Like, the overuse of CGI is not good in this movie, and it doesn't really stand the test of time. Like, Gopher in the beginning, and then the monkeys where Shia LaBeouf becomes Tarzan. Like, shit like that is absolutely for irritation. I would argue that the killer ants are actually kind of on that level too. That's
Yeah,
just that kind of goes into just bizarre territory, but like for no real reason. At least the aliens have build up, right?
yeah,
Then these ants are like climbing on top of each other and trying to like kill Kate Blanchett, and I'm like, that's weird. Whose idea was that? George, was that you? Or
Y-
Spielberg, was that you? Like,
yeah.
I
Like
don't know.
the alien is more just like, oh, that's disappointing. That could have been cool, but I guess not. But the ants, it's like they just somebody had an idea. What if they had fire ants, and so they threw it in? And I guess I don't know. I guess because you always got to think these movies are harkening back to like the old Flash Gordon kind of serials and stuff like that. And
Yeah,
people don't watch it as that like retrospective lens because they just watch it as a movie, and I get that. But I could see it maybe being like because these films are throwbacks, they are referential and pulpy, intentionally so. So I could
yeah.
see it just being a thing where like, it's heightened reality for sure in these films, especially after the first. So like I could see it being that way where it's just a set piece for set piece's sake. That's a callback to those kind of situations where it's just that way. But the original film, especially and Last Crusade, do it so organically that to see it shoehorned in that way, just because they had the idea, so why not cram it in?
I think
Isn't
that's pretty much
satisfying.
it. Like, that might be where they're coming from, is it is still an homage to a Flash Gordon or something else. Just because something's an homage doesn't mean it gels well with your own movie, which, the Kurosawa films and all of that. That's inspiration that gels so well with Star Wars. And, the adventure serials is something that gels so well with Indiana Jones. But if you take something kind of a little too exaggerated with it just all depends on what particular thing that you're making. I guess Crystal Skull in general, if it was one standalone movie, I think Crystal Skull wouldn't be criticized that same way. It's connected to Indiana Jones and three other films. So if things are a little extra corny, they're going to feel out of place. It's like, it's funny that I'm saying that because it's not like the Indiana Jones trilogy is not corny. It is. Somehow Kingdom of the Crystal Skull just on another level of corny that doesn't really match with the tone of the franchise.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm gonna make a theory here. I think that people are gonna like the next Indiana Jones. It's gonna be more toned down because it's every other film that goes over well with most audiences. And you think about it, and every other film so far has been over the top, corny, camp, insanity.
Yeah, I can see that happening. I think they will tone it down a bit, go back to the roots. At the same time, I think Indiana Jones 5 needs to have a very unique idea, a very unique premise. Don't want to see any more Christian artifacts. Nazis are gone, so they literally can't do that. Because I guess this movie, do you think it's going to be in the 1960s?
I think it'd have to be. I have a theory on what they might do with it, actually.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm curious.
I'm not saying this is what I actually think they're doing, but if I was tasked to do it, I would make it the Fountain of Youth. And the whole film is about, like, accepting that your prime's over, of course, and, you know, your adventures are coming to a close. I mean, let's be real. I mean, it's sad, but Harrison Ford isn't in his 30s anymore. He's not in his 50s anymore.
If he's in his 70s. So, yeah, I mean, just looking at some of the other actors where their journeys have come to a close, not too far away from his age. So, I mean, really, I feel like Indy 5 has to be the last one. I don't think they're married to the idea of, oh, well, we had the classic trilogy, so now we have to do a modern Indiana Jones trilogy. I don't think Indiana Jones is like that. So, Indiana Jones might be one of, if not the only series of movies that I can think of that will have 5 installments and 5 only.
Yeah, that I could think of. I'm sure I could find examples, but not off the top of my head.
I can't think of any off the top of my head either.
Because the whole thing with Indy 5 for me is you really, I mean, they can't pretend. You know, like, and I think, you know, Harrison Ford, he's doing all right. Like, I thought he was really good in Force Awakens. I didn't really care for his performance in Blade Runner. But, like, when he has to, like, fight and stuff like that, like when he's punching Ryan Gosling in the face a few times, it just doesn't sell. And, like, honestly, it probably shouldn't, because I think our minds know better and we can't be tricked. Like The Irishman, for instance, and I like that movie. I don't know if you'd say Defender, because a lot of people liked it, but there's scenes in it, of course, where Robert De Niro has to be a tough gangster, and it sucks because he physically can't be kicking someone in the head because he's an old
Yeah.
man. They don't move the same way. You can't fake it.
No, absolutely. I will go back to your point, though, Harrison Ford being something you like in Crystal Skull. I think that's a really good thing to focus on is that I don't think Harrison Ford, at least in terms of his acting range, sometimes the physical stuff doesn't seem as visceral, of course, in Crystal Skull or Star Wars or Blade Runner. In terms of his acting, I don't think he ever phones it in. I think Indiana Jones, Star Wars, Blade Runner, whatever, I think
Anchorman
all pretty
too.
much hold up. And he bolsters the sequels of all of these things by remaining to be in them, which I think is something that is really well. But yeah, I kind of like your pitch for Indy 5. I haven't really heard of pitch that's more compelling.
Maybe a mummy, I guess. It'd be kind of
Exactly.
cliche though.
And then so he becomes a super old man, so he needs the Fountain of Youth. Eventually gets to the MacGuffin that is the Fountain of Youth. Then he uses it. So with our CGI powers, we make it look like young Harrison Ford is still around.
Then they just announce an animated or a CGI like mocap Indiana Jones.
And yeah, that's Indy 6.
See, I could totally see that being the MacGuffin though, because then like the villain wants it as well for whatever reason, an old rival or some shit. So then at the end, of course, he gets the Fountain of Youth. But then I guess I'm actually taking it from Uncharted 2. I didn't think about that, but I guess I just
That's a good point. See, you know what? The Uncharted games are seeping into your brain.
yeah. So I guess they probably can't use that because Uncharted uses that, because then it'd just be way too similar. It'd be kind of incestuous.
Oh, Uncharted already stole enough things from Indiana Jones. It can be the other way around now.
That's true. It was Indiana Jones 1 or 2.
Exactly. Well, be be on the same topic, our next podcast is going to be Uncharted. We're going to still say and stay in this adventure realm because you are playing the games right now.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I couldn't quite hear your last word there.
All I'm saying is that you're playing the games right now, getting through the last Uncharted game. So that's going to be our topic for the next episode.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And it's funny because on one hand, it's like I'm telling myself like, oh, I gotta finish it. I'm kind of stressing myself. But on the other hand, it's like one of the easiest pressures in the world He's like, "Oh, I'm done working now. I got to play a video game for 2 hours before bed."
Yeah, it's an easy deadline to keep up with if you want to do it.
I'm chapter 12 or 13 right now, so I'm pretty much halfway through the game, if not more.
Oh yeah, no, you're definitely going to be fine to record in a couple weeks. I'm excited.
I am too. And so, do you think that we're good to wrap up for today's episode?
Yeah, I think so. I think the only other thing that we thought about doing was ranking slash scoring the films. I know you had mentioned doing that. Did you still want to do that?
Yeah. Do we want to rank them and give a number? Maybe go.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just give a broad sweep of what the numbers I would give it. Um, it's really hard for me to give it a 9 or a 10 to the original trilogy. I really do believe that all three original films, for all their various strengths and weaknesses, me, um, are between 9 and 10 for all three films. Because we've already talked about our favorites, and it's hard to kind of draw the line of, is Raiders of the Lost Ark objectively the best, or is Last Crusade the best? Because I think emotionally it does these things for me. I just think all three Indiana Jones movies are in that up tier plus range.
Yeah. So let's just go one by one for each film. Okay. So for me, I mean, Raiders is a 10. It's like Abbey Road or something. Like I would feel, and I'm not saying that because of pressure, but I would feel more guilt giving it a 9.5. Like I'd feel like I was like irredeemably harsh on the film to give it anything less than a perfect score.
Yeah, that's fair.
So is yours a 10, or you think like 7?
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
So how about sorry, Temple of Doom?
Yeah, so what is Temple of Doom for you? Would that be like a 9? So, well, I know that's like kind of your most entertaining one as well.
Yeah, I'd give it a 9. It's
Yeah,
because there's just
fair.
so many flaws. Like I love it as entertainment and all that. In terms of entertainment, it's a 10. But overall, like it's like my heart says one thing, my mind says another. But I do have a mind.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some weird shit. There's some shit that maybe is just in the movie for gross out sake or shock value sake. So you could say it has a little bit more substance in that regard. But yeah, I would agree with your like objective 9.
Last Crusade, I got to go 9.5, and it's really funny why. Because it's irrational, and I always try to justify my ratings, but I can't give it a 10, even though I have more fun with it than Raiders, but it's just lacking that something that bumps it up to a 10 for me. There's no one reason. I don't have a single issue with the film other than I guess there's the opening and there's a scene. I always talk about this. I probably on the show as well. I always thought there was a scene where at the Nazi rally, Indy bumps into Hitler and it's awkward. And I always thought in that scene that Indy like had to shake Hitler's hand for some reason. And I always talked about it in college. I tell people, I was like, isn't it really weird that in the third movie, Indy shakes Hitler's hand? Like, I knew he's in that situation, but he shook his hand. And then somebody told me, like, that never happened. And I had to go back and watch the scene, and it didn't.
Yeah, because doesn't Hitler just sign his book and that's it?
Something like that, yeah. It's just some, like, awkward interaction.
I find it really, really amusing that Todd, your like Bernstein Bears moment is that Indiana Jones shook hands with Adolf Hitler, and you were just so convinced that that was the case.
It was at least a whole year. And I was like, it's just so out of character. Like, I know he was incognito, but he shook hands with Hitler.
That's so funny. My hero, my movie character, he shook hands with Hitler. It's tearing me up inside. Like I can see you like brushing it off at parties and shit, but you keep telling like every new party guest that you meet, it's like, man, I just watched Crusade, man. fucking sucks. And you get like progressively more intoxicated and you're just like crying about Indiana Jones and Hitler being best friends at the end of the night.
If people thought that Luke got it bad in Star Wars, they had Indiana Jones shake hands with Hitler.
Luke shook hands with Darth Vader, dude. Come on.
As like Captain America in the more recent Marvel comics where he's a part of Hydra.
Hey, Captain America does say Hail Hydra in Avengers Endgame incognito, so there you go.
Oh, that's true. So he kind of
Go.
does. Captain America technically shook hands with Hitler metaphorically.
Oh god, that's so stupid funny to me. It is late. But yeah, I think I would give it subjective, 10 to Last Crusade. It is one of my favorite films. It really hits emotionally better than probably the other ones all combined for me. And yeah, it's definitely a little bit more tongue in cheek, and I think that makes it feel like it has less substance. But I don't care, so I'll give Last Crusade 10.
Yeah, I love that it's tongue in cheek. I think that really carries it. It's so great the balance it gets between tones. It's so funny that it's the opposite of Temple of Doom, where Temple of Doom really doesn't have that at all. It's very eclectic. And you got Last Crusade that's just like it goes from comedy to action to drama, just kind of seamlessly.
I agree. I agree. It does, and it kind of does take inspiration from Temple of Doom. It doesn't have the same style of humor, but it kind of does have the same amount of humor a lot of the times. Because there's just so many scenes where Sean Connery is dunking on Indian Nazis and everybody else, and it makes me laugh every time.
Yeah, and once again, Indy's a cool guy and everything, but then he's got his dad who's always belittling him, and he's named after the dog, and he's embarrassed by his dad. I think his dad even sleeps with the love interest in that one.
Just has a vulnerability to the character, and in that movie, that kind of subverts what you think Indiana Jones is. That I think is another reason I appreciate the film.
So here's what I think. I think in Temple, they're like, oh shit, we made this James Bond type character that we wanted to. It worked. How do we follow it up? So they just experimented and they just threw everything at the wall to see what might stick. And then they looked at it and like, okay, this worked for people, but this didn't. People didn't like this. They kind of like that though. And then so for Last Crusade, they're like, okay, we know exactly what to do here because it's just so fine tuned. It really feels like there was just trial and error with Temple of Doom, even though I love all of it. Um,
Yeah,
so by the third one, they're like, okay, we know exactly what we need to do to make this work.
absolutely. And I think that Last Crusade works for more people than Temple of Doom did too. So it does feel like there's an honest, creative process of trying to please an audience there, but without being too pandery at the same time. Which brings us to Crystal Skull, which panders too much. So what would you rate
Definitely.
that one?
It's a really hard film to rate, and what I'm going to do is it's a tough one because it's really hard because it really could depend on what you focus on, your mood. So I'm just going to go overall the movie and how I feel about it. So for me, a 5 is average. So it's like I don't like it, I don't dislike it. It's elevator music. So anything about
Yeah,
that's positive, and then like if it's a 7, I like the movie. Like I was like, oh, I'm glad I watched that. You know what I mean? And escalating from there. Similarly, 4 is like it had too many problems. I didn't really care for it. And then a 3 is like I really did not like this movie. So with all that in mind, I think Crystal Skull for me is a 6.5. Seems like the most fair rating I can give it.
yeah. Was wavering between a 5 and a 6, but I kind of felt like 5 was low. So maybe I don't know if I would go as high as 6.5. It's hard because you can rate it as a movie. Like I overall kind of like this movie, yes, but I also have higher expectations for it since it's a part of something bigger and better. I think I would just kind of settle on a 6 myself.
It makes sense. I think that it all depends on the expectations you go in with as well. Like if you go in with it expecting it to be as good as the others or wanting it to, you're gonna be disappointed. I watched it today thinking it was gonna be like a 3 out of 10. So that could definitely be a factor as well on my generosity
You're
there.
pleasantly surprised, actually.
Where I'm like, okay, it's mediocre. It's got some good stuff and some bad stuff. Overall, it's kind of a painless, all right, whatever experience. It's forgettable.
Yeah, I'm pretty much feeling that way too. I just hope that when we talk about Indy 5 eventually, that we end up rating that higher. Maybe not as high as the original trilogy. I feel like it can definitely be better than King of the Crystal Skull.
You know what would be hysterical? There's two ways it could go. It'd be funny either way. The first way would be, what if it was the best one in the entire series? Because it seems so impossible.
It does seem impossible, but you know, there are some things that I like about Disney Star Wars where I'm like, God, shit, rivals Empire Strikes Back, because I kind of like Last Jedi that much. Um, so I mean, it's possible. It could be in the echelon of the trilogy at least in terms of how good it is. It's not impossible. Do I think that will
It's not.
happen?
And what
Probably
I
not.
mean
But
though
I
is,
would love to be proven wrong.
what I mean is like leagues above, like no contest.
I, I, no contest leagues above. I don't think that's gonna happen. I don't think that could
No.
happen.
But even more funny would be if it was by far the worst.
I would just be sad, dude.
It'd be like elder abuse at that point.
I think so. I mean, like 12 years after Crystal Skull, and we bring Harrison back again just to make a way, way worse movie. That would just be heartbreaking.
It would be. I think it's just such an absurd idea to me to make it in general. This is a weird comparison, and I don't know if you've heard of this movie, but the way I would approach it is it's a film called Bubba Hotep, starring Bruce Campbell and Ossie Davis, directed by um oh boy, I just forgot his name. He's one of my favorite directors, Don Coscarelli. He made the Phantasm series, and
Okay.
what it is this is the plot of the film. So Elvis, before he quote unquote he overdosed and died, he swapped lives with an Elvis impersonator because he just wanted to break away from the fame and everything. So he lived a more modest life, and then his impersonator died of all the coke and everything. And then Elvis is now elderly, and he is in a nursing home. And he's telling people like, "I'm Elvis, I'm the real Elvis," but everybody thinks that he's just a senile old Elvis impersonator. And there's also a black man in a wheelchair there at the same nursing home who claims to be John F. Kennedy. And when they patched him up after he got shot in the head, they also dyed his skin black because nobody would ever think that a black man would be JFK. And a mummy is being transported outside the nursing home, and the truck crashes into a nearby lake. And so the mummy gets out of the lake and it feeds on the elderly, but it has to keep coming back to the nursing home to eat more people because they're so frail and weak that their souls are smaller or something like that. And it sounds stupid. It sounds like the dumbest movie ever, but the way they do it is it's really funny. It's a comedy, but it's also so emotional, and the story's so compelling, and characters die in it, and you're like heartbroken when it happens because it knows exactly how to balance that tone, and not quite as absurd. But if they can balance the tone and the age of the character as well as Bubba Hotep, which for me is like a perfect 10, that's what I would hope for.
Yeah. Good Lord, Todd. You just like explained one of the most bizarre movie concepts I think I've ever heard of.
And the thing is, that I love so much about it is when you're watching it, it's so brilliant that you just accept these ideas.
Wow. I'm gonna have to get on that one.
I absolutely adore it. It's such a fun, endearing movie. It's in my tops for sure.
Dang, yeah. Look at you, Todd. Always teaching me something new. But I think that would be a good general thing to hope for with Indy 5 is that so unique and kind of bizarre. It works off the characters and what age they're at, and it just works. So I hope for that. I guess really quick to end this off, I will give my personal ranking. This isn't an objective ranking because you guys could do that at home with the numbers we gave anyway. My personal, I love watching these movies ranking of Indiana Jones would be, I guess it would be Last Crusade. Might have to choose Raiders of the Lost Ark second, but maybe Temple of Doom. I'm about to rewatch Temple of Doom soon. So we'll just kind of put those both right in the middle, neck and neck, and then Crystal Skull.
So it's tough for me because it's almost like fuck, marry, kill for the trilogy. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
Because like I have so much admiration, and respect for Raiders, but if Temple or if Last Crusade calls me, I'm gonna have a fun night going out with Last Crusade. You know, Last Crusade's DTF, and I love Temple, but I'd have to kill it. So for
You'd
me,
fuck its dead body.
yeah, that's true. That's always an option. So for me, it would have to be probably I'm gonna say Last Crusade, Raiders, Temple, and then of course Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. And that can change on my mood, but I would say that's probably baseline, typically where I fall.
Yeah, right. It does depend on the mood. Like you said at the beginning of Temple and Crusade, or kind of an any night of the week quickie. But Raiders of the Lost Ark, you have to take it out to dinner and take it home for a nice slow lovemaking on Friday or Saturday night.
That's exactly what it is. You got to do some whining and dining for Raiders. More efforts involved on the viewer's part. That's a great way to put it. How I see it, the indie choice is Neapolitan ice cream. Some people like chocolate, some people like vanilla, some people like strawberry.
It's such a perfect metaphor, Todd, because I like all three flavors. And sometimes my favorite thing to do is to get a spoonful of Neapolitan ice cream that has all three flavors in one bite.
Exactly. And some nights you just want plain vanilla. Other nights you want chocolate. I think we all know Temple of Doom strawberry.
What ice cream flavor is Kingdom of the Crystal Skull?
You know, it's I would probably say Ben and Jerry's, but Ben and Jerry's is so good. It'd be like Ben and Jerry's
Ben
with
and
all the
Jerry.
content, but if it was really mediocre.
Ben and Jerry's what? Ben and Jerry's is a brand, not a flavor.
I know, but it's like the surplus of like all the sprinkles in it and the different like cookie dough and brownie bites. It's just like everything in there.
It's like too much, and you just feel sick afterwards.
Exactly. You know what I'm gonna say it
Oh,
is actually? I'm gonna say that it's like off-brand chocolate. So it's like trying to be like Temple, but it's just not as good of a flavor of it.
yeah, it's like off-brand Rocky Road.
Oh, that's a good comparison.
Well, I'm glad that we got into more abstract conversation right at the end here.
All right. So are you ready to end it?
Well, I opened it, so you got to end it this time, brother.
All right. See, I was trying to trick you out of it, trying to get you to carry the workload on this one. I don't know if I could handle it. I've been Todd
You
Crawford.
were testing me to see if I remembered.
That's what it was. Yeah, you passed. I'm Todd Crawford.
And I'm Eric Savinsky.
We are too cool for the comic shop.